Services Marketing, MKT 625, Lecture number 11.
Assalamu alaikum Khawateen Hazrat. This is Wasim Ahsan, your instructor for the course Services Marketing MKT 625 at the Virtual University of Pakistan. I welcome you to lecture number 11 of the course. We are in the process of learning the model for consumer behavior that lays the foundation for understanding management of expectations. Management of expectations is another model in itself, but before we reach there, we've got to understand the present model, which talks about different levels of services offered to customers and the different levels of expectations which customers may have from time to time and from situation to situation. And you will recall that we have talked about 4 different levels that are defined by marketing experts in relation to this concept. The number 1 being the ideal level of service, and you will recall that the ideal level of service is very idealistic and therefore is as highly probable as wishfulness may be. This is expecting from a service to be very punctual and just on the dot in terms of time and quality parameters, which generally may not be the case. To give you the example all over again, customers expecting that the flight must take off at 10 o'clock, which is the scheduled time. The second level of service is the desired level of service, which talks about the desirability. In other words, this is what customers want. Now, this can be exemplified by the same flight which leaves within 10 minutes of the scheduled time, thereby giving comfort to the customers about the timing which they think is okay, is acceptable, and this is what they wanted. The third level of service is the adequate level of service, which is the minimum level of service acceptable to the customers. The fourth level of service is the predicted level of service, and this is the one I really want to emphasize on because of the importance of this level of expectation that is adjusted by consumers from time to time and from situation to situation. Why and how this level of expectation is adjusted owes to the fact that expectations keep getting modified during the process of evaluation, the pre-purchase process, during the encounters, and so on and so forth. So in order to see to it that the expectations which are being modified by the customers or which are getting modified are addressed to in a proper marketing light, we have to understand this level of service with more attention. And therefore, this is the level of service which exists between the minimum level, which is the adequate level, and the highest possible level of service, which is the ideal level of service. So somewhere between these 2 points, the high and the low, we have this predicted level of service. Why customers adjust this level is something that marketing people have to look into very incisively. Because customers could have a way of calculating this level of expectation in relation to not only the demand level, but also in relation to so many other factors, which I'll be talking about in a moment. But just to give you one example of the demand factor, think of the air conditioning servicing company, which is going to be not on time when you require them during peak summer hours. Because of the high level of demand, you know that the service may not be as efficient as otherwise it would have been. And therefore, you as a customer adjust that expectation, and you adjust that expectation a little lower. You do not expect that service to be overly efficient, or rather you expect that service to be less efficient in terms of the timing and all that. And therefore, you adjust your expectation accordingly. However, if you are dealing with those people during a season which is not characterized by peak sales, your expectation level will go up. And when that goes up, you expect more from that company. So this is what I meant by adjustment of the level of expectation. This is just one example in view of the demand factor, which is just one of the factors when it comes to adjustment. I will be talking about other factors as well. What is important is that customers do have a way of calculating the level of expectation. Now, there are a few lessons which we should draw from the level of services that I've talked about, and I think developing a complete understanding of that necessitates that we take a look at a graphic illustration to clarify in absolute terms what exactly is meant by this adjustment and how this adjustment takes place. Let us go to the graphic illustration. This is a slide which is pretty easy to follow. As you can see from the illustration, we have 5 different blocks. We have 4 blocks which sit right on top of each other, and then we have the 5th one which sits on the right hand side. The topmost block is about the ideal service level, whereas the lowest block is about the adequate service level. And one lesson that we should draw from the learning that have taken place so far is that the predicted level of service falls somewhere between the lowest possible level and the highest possible level, which are the adequate service level and the ideal service level. The other lesson is that between the desired service level and the adequate service level, we have space which is known as the zone of tolerance. The reason it is known as a zone of tolerance because in most of the cases, the level of expectation or the predicted service level falls between these two levels. I just talked about predicted service level falling between the ideal and the adequate service levels, but the fact is that in most of the cases, this will fall between desired and adequate, for the simple reason that the ideal service is very idealistic, and therefore it is not the kind of service which is offered and delivered in most of the cases, and therefore experts say that customers could have a way of predicting or adjusting the expectation they have from a particular service between the desired and the adequate service levels. The zone or the area between these two levels is what you call zone of tolerance. So in other words, any service which is offered between these two levels or within this zone is going to be tolerable, is going to be acceptable, and anything which is below this is not going to be acceptable. Let me explain all over again. If there is a service which goes beyond the desired level and it falls into the idealistic level of service, then that certainly is something which is going to spin that particular company into the winner's circle, and the company is going to outcompete every other competitor in the market. But that is not something which happens generally, by and large. What generally takes place in the market is the level of service or the level of expectation falling between the desired level and the adequate level. And that is why we talk about the zone of tolerance between these two levels. Another important lesson that we can draw from this discussion is that this zone of tolerance can expand or contract depending upon the level of expectation of customers in relation to particular situations. I gave you the example of the air conditioning company, and the reason I gave that example all over again is that when you are not expecting that service to be that efficient as it should be, then your tolerance goes at a higher plane. In other words, the zone expands because you think that the minimum level of acceptance should be a little lower. However, when you are expecting a better service from the same company, your zone of tolerance will contract. So this is a very important lesson that we've got to understand from this learning. The third lesson, which again is a very important lesson, is that the point of expectation or the actual level of predicted service gets itself settled somewhere between this desired level of service and this adequate level of service. I'm rubbing in this point all over again because it is these two levels of service which take into their fold the predicted level of service, and I'm intentionally not talking about the ideal service level because experts think that the ideal remains idealistic. Having concluded these lessons, we can say that the adjustment of the level of expectation is very situational and episodic. Situational and episodic because it pertains to one particular situation at a given point in time. and again episodic also because it is one episode. Now, if the customer has come back to you for the second time, it is going to be an additional episode, and therefore the episode is going to be evaluated by the customer in light of the experience that he's had in the past. And situational because he's responding to that particular situation. And I will again recall the example of the air conditioning service. So depending upon the situation, customers have a way of calculating where exactly the expectation should be. And the implication for marketing people is very interesting here again. The implication is that we've got to understand how the customer thinks and what should be the level of expectation of the customer. Based on that, the marketing people can come up with the right strategic framework for managing expectations. Now, let's talk about other factors that impact the zone of tolerance. You will recall I having talked about zone expanding itself and contracting itself. What are the factors that are responsible for that expansion or contraction? There are 5 different factors. The first one is your personal factors. The second one is the company control factors. The third one is the perceived alternatives. The fourth one is the customer's self-perceived role while he buys the one particular service. And the fifth one is the situational factors. Let us talk about these factors one by one to develop our understanding how these factors contribute toward either expansion of the zone or contraction of the zone. Well, the personal factors are the factors that may range from your being very highly committed with your profession to the ones which can be very general. What this essentially means is if you happen to be a professional yourself and you are buying a professional service, you wouldn't really expect those professionals to be late in arriving on the point of action. You will not expect those the personnel to be inefficient, and your zone of tolerance therefore will be narrow because you are so much committed to your own preoccupation and your profession that you do not really have time to wait endlessly for those people to perform that particular service, and that gives you a narrow zone. So in this particular situation, the zone contracts, and you can think of so many different examples like electricians or plumbers or contractors coming to your home in order to perform a certain service, and then because of your commitment with your profession, it is not really possible for you to keep on waiting for those people, and therefore that gives you a contracted zone of tolerance. So this is one of the examples of the personal factors that influence the size of the tolerance zone. When I talk about all these factors, do not lose sight of the fact that all these factors have marketing implications, and I keep rubbing in the necessity and the significance of the marketing implications because whatever we learn from the standpoint of managing that. And we can manage that only if we come up with the right response. And we shall come up with the right response only if we try to understand the marketing implications of the concepts that we keep learning. The second situation could be that you might give yourself certain margin of waiting while you are standing in a queue. You're standing in a bank, or you happen to be at another public place, and you might think that the wait of more than like 10 to 15 minutes is not going to be acceptable, and that lowers your level of tolerance, and therefore results in a contracted tolerance zone. Again, marketing people have got to learn as to how to live within that narrow zone because the level of expectations of your customers is high. The third situation could be very much opposite to what I've talked about. If you happen to be a retired person, for example, your zone of tolerance might expand because you're not really hard-pressed for time. Your attitude could be laid back, and you might, give a bigger margin to the service provider, thinking that even if it takes like half an hour to deliver the service, it's okay with me. I'm not in a hurry. So this is how the personal factors impact the level of the adequate service, and this is something that you have to keep in mind, that contraction or expansion of the zone always takes place when the adequate level of service is impacted. It is always the adequate level, which is the minimum possible level, which goes either further down or it goes a little up. It is not the level of desired service which varies, because you are very clear about what should be the desirable level of service. So the adjustment that takes place in terms of the level of service is always with the adequate level of service, and the adjustment of the expectation on part of the customer that takes place is always between these two service levels, i.e. the level of desired service and the level of adequate service. I don't really want you people to be confused about these levels, and that is why I'm talking about these over and over again and rubbing in the basic essence of the role they play toward the adjustment of customers' level of expectation. So this is how the personal factors impact the level of service and the level of expectation. The other factors responsible for this kind of an impact is the company-controlled factors. And company-controlled factors, in most of the cases, are pricing strategies. What happens is when company brings about a change in the pricing pattern, that also has an impact on the minimum level of service. Let us take the example of a company which is charging a premium price, or the company has just decided to go for a premium pricing pattern. What that will do is raise the level of adequate service, meaning customers will have higher expectations only because they know they're going to end up paying a higher price, and therefore the level of expectation should be higher, and they will not expect the company to make any mistakes while they deliver that particular service. Another example could be about a promotional scheme which the company is offering with a service. Now, here is a case where a company is offering something extra, and because of that extra benefit, customers may lower their level of expectation for the simple reason that they are going to get something extra, and that extra benefit is going to expand the zone of tolerance. There could be another example. Just look at a company which is improving its distribution by offering you more points of sale, and because of this, what is happening is your level of expectation is going high because the company itself is improving its quality benchmarks. When the company gets into expanded distribution, that gives you a higher level of expectation, and therefore it raises the minimum level of service, which is the adequate level of service, and thereby giving you a narrower tolerance zone. If the company starts making mistakes by not really offering you the kind of service which you are used to, because of the factor of variability, for example, you're not going to be satisfied, and you will look upon that service from the standpoint of a dissatisfied customer. So you can see for yourself how different learning blocks, or the blocks of knowledge that we have developed so far, are intertwined and come into play with each other when it comes to the delivery of quality service. We are talking about the impact of improvement in service, and we're also talking about the possibility of something going wrong with that particular service, and then relating that with one of the characteristics of services. So this is how you should look at services marketing all the time. And having said that, I would now like to take you to the next factor responsible for this impact, and that is the perceived alternatives. I think it goes without saying, if the customer perceives so many different providers offering a similar kind of service, the zone of tolerance narrows down, because he knows that there are so many different providers, and he's going to opt for any one of those who's capable of providing the service he's looking for. So in other words, it all relates the availability or unavailability of additional or more suppliers. If the customer has more options, that gives a narrower tolerance zone. If the customer has few options, it gives a larger or a wider tolerance zone. And I think the reasons are pretty much clear to you guys by now, because the customer knows his options. The Next factor which impacts the adequate level of service is the customer's perceived role toward that particular service. You will recall the customer involvement while a service is offered. There are certain customers who involve themselves in a better way than others, and therefore end up contributing much more toward the delivery of the service than those who are kind of inactive or not proactive. And I would like to recall the example of your dealing as customers with management consultants, architects, or doctors, and giving them complete details of your particular case. You're talking about the market research project, or you're talking about your house project, you're talking about your medical history, whatever it may be. If it happens to be something very comprehensive, you look upon yourself as a customer who's smarter than others, because your contribution toward the delivery of that service is much higher, because you are getting the best out of the service provider, and therefore the level of service offered to you should be of very high quality, and that leads toward a narrow zone of tolerance. This is how the self-perceived role of a customer comes into play when we are dealing with the zone of tolerance. The next factor that impacts the tolerance zone is the situational factors. And situational factors are very much the same as the attribution theory. The customers do have a way of attributing failures to the causes responsible for those failures. And if customers think that the service that has failed was beyond the control of the provider, then the zone of tolerance gets bigger. If the case is otherwise, the zone of tolerance gets smaller. So you have seen there are different factors responsible for the expansion or contraction of the tolerance zone. And what is important for us to understand are the few lessons which I talked before I started talking about the impact of these factors. And those are that the predicted level of service or the level of expectation sits somewhere between the level of desired service and the level of adequate service. And we have to see to it that it is on a higher side, closer to the level of desired service and not close to the level of adequate service. And there are reasons for that. And the simple reason is that the closer you are to the level of adequate service, more vulnerable you are to competition. Competition will take over and put you in a position of disadvantage. Now, that is not a position which any company should look for. And you've got to be able to keep yourself away from the minimum standards which are very close to the level of adequate service. And you've got to get used to the working for those standards which are close to the level of desired service. And if you want to be a company with a competitive advantage, and if you want to sustain that competitive advantage, it is incumbent on you to learn to work within a narrow zone of tolerance. And the fact is, with the development of different markets, so many providers emerging on the scene, customers are becoming more and more fastidious, and they look for those the services which are absolutely world-class and which offer the desired level of service. So do not be taken in by the sheer fact that you are operating within a range acceptable to the customer, because that can be tricky and that can put you in a position of vulnerability. The whole idea is to keep your customers loyal so that you can develop a customer franchise. Only when you have a strong customer franchise, you will be in a position to sustain the competitive advantage. And the only way to maintain that is to exceed the level of adequate service. And I think I did point out during my lecture that it is the adequate level of service which service providers generally talk about during their communication campaigns when they claim to exceed your expectations. And the exceeding of your expectations basically refer to the adequate level of service. So keep yourself away from the adequate level of service and try to be as close as possible to the desired level of service is the summary of the learning that we have had so far. Now, let me show you with the help of a slide what I've talked about so far in relation to the tolerance zone. This slide has the three different blocks of desired and adequate levels of service. And as you can see, starting with the leftmost one, we have the largest tolerance zone, which reduces in the next one, and which further reduces into the third one, and which is the rightmost one. You can see from here that the desired level of service is consistent in this illustration. Tolerance zone B is the largest one, C is smaller, and D is the smallest one. And I think these three tolerance zones are a reflection of what I've talked about. As you can see from here, the desired level of service is consistent, whereas it is the adequate level of service which is shifting. And because of this shift, it brings to the surface the need for marketing managers to be more vigilant while they're dealing with a smaller tolerance zone. Now, if you compare tolerance zone B with C, it is obvious that marketing people have got to work harder, because the level of expectation, which basically is the adequate level of service, has gone higher. And the same is the case with the smallest tolerance zone, which makes it even harder and more challenging for the marketing people to operate within this zone. And this is how the adequate level of service shifts grounds. And when it shifts grounds upwards, it makes it more challenging for the marketing people to operate within a narrow zone. And this is what I was talking about, that marketing people, given the competitive dynamics of present day's world, have got to get used to working within narrow tolerance zones. And it is the only way to ensure your competitive advantage, and that leads to sustainability of the service that you are selling. Having talked about the tolerance zone and the levels of expectations, I would now like to summarize with the help of yet another slide, the learning blocks that we have developed so far. As a matter of fact, the concepts that I've been talking about are such that I want to make sure there is no confusion at all when it comes to understanding those in isolation and also in relation to each other. And especially when you try to understand those in relation to each other, there should be no confusion in terms of understanding of the essence of those concepts. And therefore, I would like to take your attention toward the slide which I showed you in probably lecture number 8. And whatever we have learned after that, I would like to show you as a graphical extension of that slide. As you can see from here, we started talking about the first very important concept of tangibility spectrum, and took into consideration various characteristics of services. And it was this concept that led us into understanding what really should be the classification of different services, so that we can come up with the right marketing mix for services. And you will recall that the model of marketing mix was discussed in detail, and it is the addition of the 3 Ps to the traditional 4 Ps that completed our understanding of the variables of marketing mix for services. And after talking about this concept, we got into learning the gap model. What really necessitated our understanding for the gap model was the fact that we needed to be in a position to very appropriately mix the variables in order to come up with the right framework for our strategies. And given the reason that expectations are the basis of everything when it comes to services, we needed to understand the gap model, because there's always a gap between what the customer expects and what the customer gets. And when he matches what he got with what he expected, he always finds a gap. And we learned that it is only with the help of a mixed bag of marketing variables that we can deal with this model. But before we deal with this model, we've got to understand a few more factors which lay the ground for this understanding. And it was those factors which brought us into the area of the evaluation process, because the evaluation process also carries expectations as the common denominator, and it is toward meeting those expectations that we had to understand the different phases of the evaluation process through which a customer passes. And you will recall the pre-purchase phase, the encounter phase, and the post-purchase phase. While we try to understand the evaluation process, what we are doing essentially is trying to understand how to minimize the gap, because it is an understanding of the thought process of the customer that we can be in a position to come up with the right strategies and right responses to close that gap. If not close that gap, at least minimize that gap. And concurrently with the understanding of this model of evaluation process, we also have developed an understanding of another model of consumer behavior, which is the level of expectations. And this being so fresh in our minds, I would not like to get into further details. What is more important about these two models is that both deal with a certain type of consumer behavior, and the need for us marketing people to understand that consumer behavior highlights itself from the standpoint of our ability to minimize the gap. And that is why you see these arrows stemming from these two models of consumer behavior and going back into the blue bar, which signifies the gap model, because we are trying hard to minimize that gap. And that gap is all about customers' expectations. And therefore, you can well imagine the interplay of the two models of consumer behavior, that is the process of evaluation and the level of expectations, how those are interconnected with the gap model, and that gives us a clear understanding as to how to approach the area of services while we are trying to come to grips with the problem of gap. Having understood all this, I would like now to take you to something which is very fundamental in nature and does not really reflect another the model of consumer behavior. Rather, it is going to be something supportive in nature. And this is a topic which you learned during Fundamentals of Management and also during one of your marketing course, and that is about the need. What exactly is it that forms a need, and how do you satisfy a customer need, and how do you identify that and recognize that is going to be the topic of learning in the remaining part of this lecture. And I said it is not going to be a model in itself, it is going to be a supportive learning. Every marketing program starts with identification of a need. Once you have identified one particular need, you start working on satisfying that need. And trying to satisfy that need is a very strategic process, because it takes marketing people through all the strategies that one can have in order to develop a product and then make it up to the expectations of the customers. One of the ways that we ensure that we are referring to the right demographics and psychographics while we are coming up with the right strategies is to pay attention to the hierarchy of needs as propounded by Maslow. Now, this is a theory which I was referring to earlier in relation to your having done it in one of other courses like Fundamentals of Management or maybe one of the marketing courses. This theory is something which gives you a very strategic outlook, because you are dealing with different levels of needs, and it makes the whole process very strategic. And that is exactly what marketing people look for while they develop their strategic programs. This is a theory which really gives you a very good vision about the particular need you're trying to address. And this is something which really enables you to position that product correctly and then come up with the differentiation features which really highlight your product as something different from the rest of the crowd. And it is a theory which really helps you come up with the right strategies relating pricing, promotions, distribution, and communication, and so on and so forth. So taking a look at this theory is very important for us, because we are going to see what kind of marketing implications this theory can have if we understand it properly. As you will recall from your earlier learning about this theory, that the different levels of needs that we have are very successive in nature. And once we have fulfilled one level of needs, we get onto the next level, and then to the next, and to the next. And we also know that there are 5 levels of needs as expressed by Maslow. The lowest level of needs is the physiological needs, and the next one is the needs for security and safety, and then the next one is for belongingness. It basically is social belongingness, and then needs for self-esteem, and then right on top of the pyramid, you will recall, we have the needs for self-actualization. Let us talk about these needs one by one in detail and see what kind of marketing implications they can have. And let us start from the bottom, which is the physiological needs, which are all about basic food, shelter, clothing, etc. Nobody can go or should go to the next level of needs until the time this level of needs has been fulfilled. Now, this is something which Maslow has expressed. There is no marketing research findings or support this very contention that you have to go to the next level only once you have fulfilled the lower level of needs. But it is an acceptance on part of many marketing experts, or rather most of the marketing experts, that this is the way the hierarchy of needs works. So going back to the basic physiological needs, which are about food, clothing, and shelter, the marketing implication is that we have to look at the basic needs of our customers. If somebody is trying to grab a sandwich during the lunchtime, this takes us back to the example which I talked about in one of my earlier lectures, or somebody is trying to grab a cold drink because he's thirsty. He doesn't really have to go to a very specialized kind of a place. He only has to walk into a place which has been developed very much in line with the positioning of that need. So in other words, if somebody wants to have a quick sandwich during the lunchtime, one should be able to go into a fast food setup which is about carry out or quick deliveries. And therefore, we as marketing people have to come up with a setup, meaning the physical evidence or the tangible evidence in a way that it justifies the positioning of that particular product. And similarly, if somebody wants to get into making nightwear, then one should not be having a physical evidence which may reflect the positioning of a designer, and vice versa. A designer should not be getting into things which are very basic in nature. So the marketing implication is that the positioning is extremely important, and the physical evidence that we create and all the supports that we bring into play to make that physical evidence a success have got to be very much in line with the positioning of the product. Anything out of line with positioning is going to lead us toward marketing contradictions. And let us take the example of a tailor who's into making basic stuff for nightwear, giving the impression of being a designer. If the tangible evidence has been created in a way that it gives the impression of that particular setup being a designer setup, then it certainly leads to the marketing contradictions, because the tailor is not really getting himself toward the segment of the market he's supposed to be catering to. He's preparing himself for another segment of the market for which probably he's not prepared. And therefore, being very much in line with the positioning is of extreme importance. The second level of needs is about security and safety. And these are the needs that relate protection from any physical harm that may come our way. Let me try to explain that with the help of an example. Let us talk about a society in which law and order situation has deteriorated, that many security-minded people may think of coming up with security companies that offer protection to its prospective customers against any possible physical harm. Now, this company is going to have a philosophy which can set this company apart from its competitors and be known as a prime setup when it comes to security, so that customers can perceive this company as a company which will take care of their needs and expectations when they land into an emergency situation. Look at the customers, how they will think about this kind of a company, and thinking about customers' perspective, we obviously go back to the process of evaluation. The customers will go through a very comprehensive pre-purchase phase in which they will think about so many different factors, the one being referrals and the word of mouth, what others have to say about that particular security company, and the other factors in particular being different kinds of risks which the customers might face if they engage that security company. And to be able to ensure that this company will come really up to the mark, if need be, the customer might like to stage a kind of a fake encounter by making a call to the company just to see the level of preparedness of this company as to how their personnel play their script and prescribed roles if they were to help this particular customer or these particular customers in a state of emergency. And during that fake encounter, they really can size up the quality of the company in terms of their preparedness. So this is the one example of identifying security needs as propounded by the author of the theory, and relating that with what we marketing people can do in order to capitalize on the opportunity which the marketplace may present us. Another example could be about the insurance business in relation to travel. Travel insurance is becoming very popular nowadays because of the changing world. There are so many different kinds of threats, and air travel especially has become an area which is perceived as a very vulnerable area. And you as marketing people have got to identify that particular need. And if you happen to be an insurance worker, you've got to see to it the kind of tangible evidence or the distribution strategy which you should be employing in order to become effective seller of travel insurance. You may like to get into collaborations with banks and other organizations of the sort that may provide you with a platform where you can sell the service and really promote the service in a way which is away from being very traditional. So getting into an untraditional way, rather a modern way, so that you can improve the proximity of this kind of service selling, you have to be in a position to identify this particular service. So that takes us into the next area of the hierarchy of needs, which is about social belongingness. Social belongingness is all about our desire to be socially accepted and admired. Marketing people have to look at it from the standpoint of segmentation. They have to identify the right need group which is looking to satisfy this kind of a need. And these needs could present themselves in the form of restaurants, in the form of health clubs or social clubs, because those are the kind of places where people go and satisfy their need of the social belongingness. In other words, people go to these places because then they are known as people who are patronizing those places, and the reason they patronize those places is because they want to be accepted as part and parcel of that particular place, and they want to be known as belonging to that particular place. The implication for marketing people is to identify the right need group, whether the need group relates a restaurant, and if a restaurant, what kind of a restaurant? If the need group relates with some kind of a social club, what kind of a social club? Is it a club which is just a meeting place, or a club with a nice restaurant, or a club which also should have a library, and eventually should also have the tennis courts and other sports facilities. Another company might identify a group of youngsters who are interested in a bowling alley. So this company may come up with a setup of a bowling alley along with a snack bar. Another company might yet like to capitalize on the opportunity which presents itself by way of having an internet cafe where youngsters can come and meet the challenges which the online technology offers them. So the essence of identification of these kinds of need groups lies in our ability as marketing people to come up with the right mix of marketing variables and then relate those variables with the resource capability of the company so that we can see whether or not we are in a position to undertake the kind of businesses that I've talked about, whether different kinds of businesses are related or not related. What is important is the ability of the marketing company to be able to deliver a quality service. And in order to deliver a quality service and satisfy your customers, you have to have the right personnel and you have to have the right support services, and the personnel should be able to play their scripts very effectively, and the equipment should come into play, and so on and so forth. The next level of needs is about self-esteem, and self-esteem is all about success and respect. You like to command more respect from others because you like to be known as a successful person, and in order to do that, you like to get into things which are additional in life and which give you rather additional qualification to be known as a successful person and to be able to command others' respect. And I will give you two examples here. One could be about a lady who's educated but may like to get into interior designing, and therefore at the end of the day be known as somebody really talented. The other example could be of a professional who might like to get into a business school in order to brush up his knowledge and do some extra courses about the profession that he's into. If he can do that very successfully, he will command respect of his colleagues, and he will be known as a successful person because he might get promotions as a result of that. So the marketing implication of these two examples is that you being marketing people are going to have to come up with a training place where you can train those ladies desirous of improving their skills on interiors. And you have to have the right personnel, you have to have other resources so that the variables of marketing mix come into play the way they should. And same is the case with the other example that if a business school is thinking of capitalizing on the opportunity of training professionals, they have to come up with programs that are meant for successful professionals, and they then must provide a service which is a function of extremely educated and talented teachers having also practical experience so that they can train the people who already are executives and want to improve their qualification further. So it always is the marketing essence that we should be sensitive to, and we should size up and then come up with our responses to the situations the market offers us. The next level of the needs is what Maslow calls self-actualization. Now, this is not the kind of level which everyone wants to achieve and fulfill. This is about doing something which is rather a unique experience, and most of the people do not really like to get into that. Either they are short of resources or they just do not have any passion to have that kind of fulfillment. The examples could be about an executive who might like to get into flying, or a commercial flyer who at times might like to jump into a small plane and fly it from under a bridge. As somebody who may like to get into hang gliding and so on and so forth. So these are the self-actualization needs. And again, the lesson for marketing people is to look at the commercial and marketing angle so that they can come up with the right service products. And what is it that requires to come up with the right service products? I think we have learned quite a bit by now. And what are the implications of the theory of hierarchy of needs is something I would be talking in a little more detail in the next lecture. Thank you very much for being with me during this lecture, and Allah Hafiz until the next one.